might have that perception that some people say, well, it'll never happen in our community, but we know that it does. There isn't a community I've come across that's exempt from seeing cases of domestic abuse.
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and today we are with Gillian from Warsaw Council. Right, so Gillian, do you want to tell us what job you do?
Yes, so my name's Jill Garrett and I'm the Community Safety Support Officer at Warsaw Council. Been with the council since May. Prior to that I was with a women's refuge over at the Haven in Wolverhampton.
So what does your role now entail?
My role now is a very varied role, very mixed. I support the Community Safety Support team, or I support the Community Safety team in all the aspects of their work. So we have some focus around domestic abuse, we have some focus around antisocial behaviour. We work quite closely with our community protection team, and we do some work with our Safer Warsaw partnership, so a partnership of organisations across the Warsaw Borough who include anybody and everyone from police, housing, education, healthcare, criminal justice, probation, amongst other people. And we work together to look at how we can make Walsall a safer borough, a safer place for people to come and live, work, study, and be a part of the community here.
Okay, wow, that sounds like a big job, to be honest, isn't it?
It sounds like a very small task, but it's got lots of different strands to it. So yeah, it becomes a much bigger job than people might anticipate.
You mentioned domestic abuse. So obviously we are recording the first few episodes dedicated to domestic abuse. So please tell us what's happening in November.
Okay, so coming up in November, we've got something called our 16 Days of Action. It's a global campaign, so we decide how we want to, what kind of events and things we want to put on during the 16 Days of Action, but the focus is around violence against women and girls. So that's how it started, and it's a UN global campaign. In Warsaw Borough, we've had lots of support over the years to look at how we can put on events and activities and things during that period of time, which starts on the 25th of November. So 25th of November, we've got White Ribbon Day. And that's a conversation that focuses around how we can look at violence against women and girls, how we can draw kind of other people, other members of our communities into that conversation and get support for women and girls. But also, look, we do look broader beyond that. So, you know, we can have that conversation. Domestic abuse is something that affects everybody. It's not just women and girls. But it is a much more in-depth conversation. But yeah, 25th of November starts our 16 Days of Action, and we've got lots of great things planned during that time that our partners have put together. So we have a task and finish group in our domestic abuse forum, and that's partner agencies again who've come together to just think about how we can raise awareness around violence against women and girls, how we can get some male allyship going, get some conversations going with males in our community. So there's a brilliant video that White Ribbon have put together, and that focuses on our male allies out there and how we can call out some of the misogynistic behaviours that we see going on in our communities. And that's, you know, men and boys across all age groups. So that starts on 25th of November, which is White Ribbon Day. And we've got a campaign of things happening across our communities during that period of time.
So how does the community find out what is organised? How can they find out?
So we've got a big double-page spread coming up in something called Pioneer magazine. So Pioneer magazine is a magazine that goes out to households across the borough. Okay. And the amazing Jill Thomas at Pioneer magazine has supported us to produce a double-page spread that talks about what the campaign is, what kind of things we've got going on during that time. So that'll be dropping through the letterboxes all across Walsall. We'll have some information on our Safer Warsaw Partnership website as well, so there'll be some comms coming out from there. We'll have some comms coming out from the council itself, from Walsall Council. The comms team have been absolutely brilliant in supporting the work that we've got going on during the time, which is fantastic. And yeah, if people want to get in touch with me, you can find my details on the Safer Warsaw Partnership website. People can drop me emails, give me calls, And if they want to get involved, they can do. We've got all kinds of amazing things happening, some of which we've had chats about before. So I'm starting.
So tell us what's happening.
Yes.
Because I've got some parcels for you. Like we've got a lot of them. So what's these for?
Amazing. So we decided, the campaign last year decided that this year they would like to have a tree. And the idea originally was going to be that they were just going to purchase a tree, put it in place, people would hang messages on it. And as with all our great ideas, they evolve into something much bigger. And we decided we would make a tree. So we've got a tree of hope that is being created as we speak by some amazing carpenters. And that will be going on display at the Walsall, the New Art Gallery in Walsall, from the throughout the 16 days. So from the 26th, actually, because the gallery's shut on the Monday. So I'll be in there on the Monday, furiously putting flowers on the tree. And that will stay in place until the 10th of December, which is the end of our 16 days of action. But what we did is we approached our community partners, our partnership partners, community groups across the borough, and asked them if they wanted to make some flowers. So whether that was knitted, crocheted, paper crafted, whatever medium they wanted to make them out of. And we've had some just amazing contributions. I've got people ringing me, Jill, can you come and pick up a bag of flowers? I've been busy over the weekends. I've only managed to do a couple, and then you go and pick them up and there's 45 handmade flowers in there. It's absolutely stunning. So yeah. And the idea behind that is sort of, when we're out in our communities, we've got people who perhaps feel a bit isolated. They feel, a very small part. Perhaps they don't even feel like they belong or feel like they're part of something. But actually, when we bring all these small pieces together, it creates something amazing that has come from the community, that's been made by the community and belongs to the community. And the groups have been sort of saying, I'm looking forward to coming and visiting the tree and seeing if I can see my flower, which is really nice.
Yeah, so our ladies, they don't know that it's going to be on display. They don't, it's a surprise. So they were doing some paper flowers on Saturday, and they actually found it quite relaxing to do art, because I think when you grow up, you don't do it unless it's with your children. So it was really cool activity for them. We just left it as a surprise for them. Yes.
And what we hope to do is, so if you've been into the New Art Gallery before, there's a kind of mezzanine floor which you'll know about. If you haven't been in them before, I would encourage people to go and visit. But on the mezzanine floor, we'll have the tree that'll be covered with all these beautiful flowers, and then behind it there'll be some cabinets, and in there we'll have some information that's displaying all of the projects who've been a part of creating the amazing thing that they see standing before them. So yeah, your ladies will get a massive surprise.
Yeah. So what do you think, obviously we're talking, so what is domestic abuse?
What is domestic abuse? I think that's one of the really challenging things people kind of need to wrap their heads around. I think there's an anticipation that a conversation around domestic abuse still focuses very much on violence, and it's not always about those physical acts of violence. So somebody, who's listening to us having a conversation today might just resonate with them. It can be, it can be name calling, it can be those physical things, but it can be name calling, it can be making somebody feel, small, attacking their self-esteem and their self-confidence. It could be around, abuse of somebody's finances. It could be those controlling and coercive behaviours that we see playing out. So, somebody monitoring where somebody goes or who they spend their time around, controlling what they wear, what they eat, where they spend their time. Whether they're able to communicate with family and friends, or whether, they're encouraged to not do those kinds of things. And often we see that playing out in very manipulative ways. So it can be, those kinds of, well, if you loved me, you wouldn't want to go, you'd want to stay here with me. And, if you really loved me, you wouldn't wear that, or don't go into work today, stay here with me, And that starts to affect somebody's capacity to hold down a job or earn their own money, or, have that confidence and self-esteem that we're all entitled to. We all should be able to feel that we're worthy of. So we see domestic abuse playing out in many, many, many different ways, and I think it's busting those myths around domestic abuse, that it only happens to certain types of people or certain pockets within our communities, and that we might have that perception that some people say, well, it'll never happen in our community, but we know that it does. There isn't a community I've come across that's exempt from seeing cases of domestic abuse.
Do you know the statistics?
Not off the top of my head, but, the anticipation at the minute with statistics is, you know, we're talking around 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women a week who experience some really significant abuses, ultimately murder. And we also have seen, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but in the last 12 months or so, there's been a piece of research carried out. And the research is starting to show that we're now seeing victims taking their own lives, you know, completing suicide as a consequence of the things that they've experienced in those abusive relationships. So we're starting to see those cases overtake the stats in terms of actual homicides now. So we have had some changes. Part of the work I do is around supporting a panel of people who will look at cases of domestic abuse and domestic where there has been a death. And they've now been entitled domestic abuse related death reviews rather than domestic homicide reviews, because it's not always about a murder. You know, we do know there are cases of people who have taken their own life from the consequences of the abuse that they've had to live with. So some really, really challenging circumstances that people are finding themselves going through and living with. And, you know, from the very brief conversation that we've just had and the kinds of things that might be included in that, it's not really difficult to see why somebody would find it such a struggle.
So it's easier to recognize that you are being abused when you have bruises on your face or like physically hurt. Yeah. How easy is it for a victim to recognize that there is this coercive abuse happening? I
think that's one of the challenges that people face, isn't it? And it's that shift away from the conversation around violence. You know, years ago, and we've had a conversation about this building and the fact that it used to be a refuge space for women. Years ago, it was about that violence, and it was that perception of, you know, if we could see the bruises and we could see that somebody had been battered, then we get it. And, you know, for women who were victims at the time, I've had a conversation with women in my kind of workload in the past where they've said, well, I wasn't a battered wife, so I wasn't abused, you know, I didn't fit in that space. But there's so many other types of abuse occurring. And it's the kind of examples that I've just given there that kind of might set some kind of alarm bells ringing in somebody's head that actually helps them to recognise that is their experience. You know, that partner who says, don't go out with your friends tonight, stay here with me. If you really loved me, you'd stay in with me. You know, I really miss you when you go out, just stay at home. Or what you're wearing that for, or who you're wearing that for, which was an experience that I had in my past. You know, if I put certain types of makeup on or kind of a little bit more makeup on, sometimes we just want to make ourselves feel good, don't we? We just want to kind of grow our confidence. But I would get the who are you wearing that for? You know, and you then start to think, why do I need to justify? And then you start to think, well, actually, it's easier if I don't do that anymore, because then I don't have to face all the questions. And then you get to the point where you're so far down the line that you kind of look back and go, actually, I don't recognise who I am anymore. I've changed things about myself, the clothes I wear, or the amount of makeup I wear, or who I spend my time around. And, you know, if that resonates with somebody out there, then they're the kinds of conversations that we need to have so that people might start to just take a look at their own experience. And that doesn't mean to say that somebody, you know, has to leave or might want to leave, but at least reach out and have a conversation with somebody who's there to support you. And that, you know, you've got here at Reach for the Stars, you've got some amazing organisations out there who are, you know, ready to have that conversation when it's the right time for that person.
I've got millions of questions from that. Like, I don't even know where to start. Is your personal experience what motivates you?
I would say probably yes now. It wasn't originally. My personal experience was something I shied away from a very, very long time. So, yeah, it was... There was a significant event in my life that happens getting on for 30 years ago now, and that was something that took me decades to really be able to get to the point of having a conversation around, and that was in relation to, you know, something that happened in my late teens. But I think you get to that point where, certainly for me, it was about that realisation that on that day that person took what they wanted from me, they took enough from me, and actually I'm not going to let people take things from me anymore. and I'm stronger than that. And that's not to say that going through what I went through made me a weak person, because nobody is. It takes amazing strength to actually acknowledge what you're going through as an abusive situation. I then found myself in a situation where I was training police officers for a living. So I've spent a long time in a learning development career. And I was training police officers for a living. And one of the guys who I was friends with there, he says, how do you do this every day? You know, I was part of the work that I was doing was around domestic abuse. How do you stand up and talk about this every day, knowing what you're going through or what you've been through? And I said, because if it makes that one little bit of difference to somebody else to hear that conversation or to hear that story or to be able to identify that, you know, she's just like me, you know, she works, you know, she's got family, she does all these things, but she's just like me. To bust those myths, to break those stereotypes, then it's worth it, you know. And yeah, so I carried on and pursued that. And I've really enjoyed some of the roles I've been in over the last 20 years or so in learning development, but working with all kinds of women, working with men as well, working with amazing organisations who are doing lots of work in this space and reaching out to sometimes those harder to reach aspects of our communities. So working with our LGBT community, working with men. I've done lots of work with men over the years around mental health. But yeah, some of those harder to reach communities, perhaps working with people who just don't know where to turn to get support, and find it a real struggle, whether that's through a language barrier or cultural differences or, you know, religious backgrounds, whatever it might be. But just anyone who's working in the space just wants to keep sharing that message that there is always somebody out there.
Yeah, and I think it's quite important, I think, to understand that going through domestic abuse is not easy on its own, and then you have additional barriers that, whether it is your gender, whether it is your religion, whether it is the country that you come from, whether it's language barriers, right? So how much more difficult it is for someone to even go out and reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. It just keeps adding those layers of difficulty to it, doesn't it? And people just sometimes get to the point where they think, do you know what, actually, I don't know where to start. It just feels very overwhelming. It feels very exhausting. And they haven't even had the conversation yet. So sometimes it's easier to stay in the situation, or it might feel like it's easier to stay in the situation than it is to face all those, you know, overlapping complexities that people are going to have to kind of get through. I think the key message within that is nobody needs to do that on their own. You know, there are organisations out there who will support people. The first step they've just got to do is reach out and talk to somebody. And we can't kind of reiterate that enough to all of the groups that we talk to anybody that we talk to in, you know, about any of the things that we've got going on, is just reach out and talk to somebody. And even if they're not the right person, they'll find somebody who is, you know. Our organisations, our partnership are all connected, and we'll talk to each other and we'll share information, you know, if we've got consent to do so. And we'll signpost people to the most appropriate sources of help and support. So
you mentioned about the suicide. Do you know the ratio of suicides to victims?
Not at the minute. There was a piece of research that's been done, and there is a report that people can get their hands on, that was completed by it sits under the Royal College of Policing now. But there's a piece of research that's been done, and there is a report that looks at victim suicide. We've got an event coming up on the 4th of December. That's a development event for professionals, which I will send you the details to. But we've got a development event coming up that is one of the key areas of conversation. So there's four topics that we're talking about, and that is going to be one of the key areas of conversation, is around victim suicide and around tools that professionals can use, mainly the police, but tools that professionals and other agencies can use to kind of look at those risk factors that relate to somebody wanting to take their own life. And, you know, everything about that is how can we prevent that happening? When life feels very overwhelming, when it all just feels like it's piling on top of somebody, when it just feels like none of this is going to stop. And we, you know, we've talked in there about some of the barriers around kind of language, culture, religion, etc. It could be age. But we've also got those things in there around people having to face things like custody battles in court around children, or, you know, children being used as a tool in the perpetrator's whole game of abuse that they're playing. So that's one of our key areas of conversation as well. And yeah, you know, in terms of suicide, is what does that risk actually looks like for this individual when they're facing all those things. You know, somebody's facing having their children removed or has already had their children removed. You know, life can feel really hopeless. And that's always one of those words that kind of, when we get into this space and these conversations, you know, when somebody just feels hopeless and defeated, you can't help but, I don't want to kind of do the whole head to the side and feel sympathy. You know, we need to feel empathic. And I think we get lots of professionals who work in this space who are very empathic about somebody's circumstance. But when somebody's feeling so hopeless and so defeated, it's not hard to see why they might choose suicide or see suicide as their only option. And it's how do we work collectively, because I think one of the things I will always emphasise about partnership working is that we're stronger when we do it together. We work in silo a lot of the time, but we're actually stronger when we do it together. So, you know, collectively we can support people.
So with the suicide, were you guys involved in Warsaw suicide strategy?
So Warsaw Council have got their own suicide strategy that's been put together. That's available there for people to see on the council's website. And it's really important that we have those pieces of work in place across the borough, so that, you know, we've got a really robust and strong process that everybody can follow, so that we can get the best support in place for people.
We've got a person with lived experience doing episode as well. And from her experience, what she was saying, that sometimes, because she went through the emotional abuse, and it's not easy to prove. So it was not easy for her to go through the police, because she found it that there is very little understanding of what emotional abuse is. So even though on paper you tick the box, you don't really understand how do you deal with it, how do you prove it, what do you do. And then in court, like you mentioned, is about using the children as a tool, right? But courts don't always see that, especially when it comes to children's court. It's about the child, and they don't remember, or they don't seem to remember, that it's about domestic abuse. How do we protect the kids?
One of the key things that came out of the Domestic Abuse Act, one of the things that was really pleasing to see, this Domestic Abuse Act came in 2021, was the recognition of children as victims in their own right, and how they have been used as tools by perpetrators, how they have been used as kind of pawns in the whole process. That actually, you know, there have been occasions where I've come across situations where the perpetrator didn't really want anything to do with the children. They didn't really want, but what they did want was that power and control over the victim, and in you know, taking control of the children, in fighting for custody and taking that person through that process of court. That's how they continue to retain that control. So when we talked before about controlling and coercive behaviour, that might be a way that we see it playing out. And perpetrators will abuse. They'll abuse professionals if they can. You know, there's lots of manipulation going on. So yeah, it's just being mindful that we recognise those kinds of behaviours occurring, but also for that protection of children as well. So that recognition of you know, domestic abuse in their early life is going to have an impact, whether that's, you know, from birth or even prior to birth. So we know those experiences. I did lots of training in the past, and we had an amazing reception from people like midwives and health visitors, who were really starting to grasp and really impassioned by the fact that this starts before baby's even born, you know, and just looking at that whole process through their early life is making sure that we're doing everything to protect those children right through that journey. And there is no one single agency that sees that child through that process. You know, lots of agencies will have had, or potentially could have had, involvement with that child and that family, and it's making sure we get those experiences documented properly, recorded properly, those conversations happen, so that when somebody does find themselves in court, we've got some really good, robust evidence that they can use to support them. that's one of the conversations that we have with the police all the time, is around that kind of early evidence gathering and making sure that we're not missing opportunities to capture, you know, really vital pieces of evidence. And again, I talked about the development day. That's one of the conversations that we're having with our professionals around the domestic abuse desk that West Midlands Police have. So we've invited Sue Porter to come and speak to us. She was the lead on the project there and is also involved in things like Clare's Law disclosures and making sure people are using the tools that we've got at our disposal effectively and properly so that we can support victims. So yeah, there's lots of conversation happening around things like courts. We've also got Richard Port coming to speak to us on that day. Richard Port is a huge advocate of anything to do with domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, domestic abuse in lots of different sectors of our communities, and he's coming to speak to us from his experience of as a law professional. And yeah, he's just a fountain of knowledge when it comes to anything to do with the law and how we can really support victims in that space.
Well, it's a huge topic, really, isn't it? Because we talk about the childhood trauma for the victim.
Yeah.
As a child, and then what it must do to someone. So it's very early prevention, really. What do you do with the child?
Yeah, it is, because it's sort of, you know, if we don't acknowledge the experience that child is going through, and often the conversation that we'll have with victims is, you know, a victim might sit before us, they'll talk to us about their experience. We might ask about children, or we will ask about children, and they'll say, you know, they never see it, they never hear it. Yeah. Children aren't daft. They know, they sense it, they feel it, they see the nerves, the anxiety that the victim parent is displaying. They see it, you know, they know what's happening. And children, you know, have got very good coping strategies. So it might be they appear withdrawn at school, they might shut themselves down a bit, they might not talk to anybody about this, so it might be perceived that there isn't a problem. Yeah. But actually...
But it also affects the learning potential, isn't it?
Yeah, so absolutely, much, yeah. You know, while we've got this child in school who's sat in the classroom ever so quietly minding their own business and not saying anything to anybody, they might have 3 million thoughts going through their head about what's happening at home while they're at school, you know, and we're asking this child to try and sit and concentrate and learn, and that's really difficult to do when all you're thinking about
and then straight away, how many inequalities are presenting for that child, right? Like what the projections for the future life.
Yeah.
Because not only that, if it's a girl, she can then end up in an abusive relationship, or if it's a boy, he might end up being an abusive partner and things like that. So there's just so much to think about, right?
Some of these things become very normalised behaviours, don't they? And the perception of healthy relationships is that's what a healthy relationship looks like. We know it doesn't. We know that's not how a healthy relationship plays out. But for a child who's never seen anything different other than the relationships in their home, then why would they question that? You know, they just think that's how relationships are and how relationships are meant to be. So it's really important that we have conversations about in pregnancy in early years, throughout the education system, with our young people who are entering into relationships for that first time. And making sure those experiences are healthy. What we don't want to do is just see cycles and cycles of generation after generation going through the same experience because they think it's normal. And you know, they think that's the only way to do relationships. So it's really important that we get all our partners on board, including education.
The partnership. Who really needs to sit in that conversation? Because it sounds like a lot really. It's not just police problem, right?
And I think that's one of the myths we need to bust, isn't it? Is that, you know, people rely heavily on our criminal justice partners when things like this are happening. But it's everybody. You know, we all have a responsibility in our communities to look out for people. And our partnership, the Safer Walsall partnership, is made up of our police partners. It's chaired by a police officer. But it's made up of members from across the council. It's made up of housing. We have people from education who sit in there. We have people from healthcare sitting there. You know, we're really fortunate here in Walsall, if we can look at it that way, that we do have an IDVA who sits within our A&E departments at the Manor Hospital. So not all hospitals have a hospital IDVA, but ours is provided by Black Country Women's Aid, and it's amazing that we've got that resource so that if people are entering into A&E with kind of injuries or, you know, at that point of crisis, that we have got somebody with that specialist domestic abuse knowledge within that organisation. So yeah, we've got housing, we've got police, probation, we've got criminal justice sitting in there. I'm just trying to work my way around the table from our last board meeting, but anybody and everybody needs to be aware, and that's where we start with the 16 days. It's about raising awareness of the whole topic of conversation, getting people talking about domestic abuse and who might be affected by that, getting people talking about different types of abuse and how that might play out. And it's making sure all the organisations that sit within the partnership, you know, that cascade through their own organisations, that staff at all levels have that awareness raising. So, you know, we've had some brilliant organisations that we've been involved with. People like the banks, you know, there's some amazing work that people like Nationwide Bank and TSB Bank are doing. Yes, they don't sit within our CSP partnership, but they're out in our communities, and they're often spaces that people can go into because it's a bank. But if you go into Nationwide, if you go into TSB, certainly we've got staff trained within those organisations who understand domestic abuse. You can go in and ask for a safe space. You can go in and ask for support. That isn't just around financial support, so they'll be able to signpost you to other services as well. So it's reaching.
So, but how should people know about it?
That's part of the issue. People don't know about it, and unless we talk about it, unless we start to promote these kinds of activities that are going on and encourage people to utilise them, then people won't know about it. So yeah, you know, just sharing that information, having those communications. I can share some contacts with you for both of those banks that I've just mentioned, who will happily come and talk to you about the work that they're doing. And how that relates to you know, the banking world and financial abuse. We see increasing amounts of financial abuse occurring. So people having their finances exploited, either not being able to access money, having money taken off them, not being able to ask for a bank card. You know, one thing that never really might stand out in somebody's mind, but we see it a lot now. People will ask, do you want a receipt? You know, when you get a little bit of shopping in farm foods, whatever it might be, do you want a receipt? And I'll always say no, because otherwise I just end up with a pocket full of receipts. But people will say, oh, you know, yeah, I need that. And it might be that they're stringently, you know, monitoring their bank accounts or just keeping a check on their finances, which is great. But they also might have to go home and show that to the perpetrator to justify what they've spent, how much they've spent, did they only buy what they were told they could buy. So there's a whole heap of reasons.
But that just like straight away, like how gives me an idea. Like if you have a maintenance guy coming to your house and he can see situations, right? Because so there's so many people could benefit from having a training about domestic abuse awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. A basic awareness raising that we can talk about during the 16 days and beyond that, because, you know, it extends way beyond that. But yeah, those people in say housing association properties, or it might be people living in privately owned properties, and they you know, might be calling somebody in to do a piece of work. Would that person even think, oh, you know, this is the third time I've been back to fix this hole in the wall, or you know, for whatever it might be. And just by having that kind of little bit of a awareness raising training, it might just trigger that thought that gets them to report and record that.
And that's so important, because like this morning we had a networking event for businesses. So after the first conversation that we had, I reached out to that lady, I can't remember her name, that you connected me with, and I actually bought her training for one of our volunteers, how to support victims of domestic abuse at work. It is not expensive. It still costs, I think, like 70 quid or something like that. So it's not terrible cost, but like for small business owners, it's still a cost. Is there anything that people can access for free?
There probably will be. What I would say is find credible sources of information. There are lots of people who pop up in learning and development spaces who are offering things for free, and it's making sure that what they're offering is credible, up to date, up to speed. So if we've got providers out there who are doing pieces of work, who want to share their training calendars or their events and things with us. That's great. We have got, there's somebody called Voices, who have got their email in the double page spread that I was talking about in Pioneer magazine. I know that they've got some events coming up. So they've got some work going on, and they focus a lot around hearing the victim's voice and doing those pieces of work with people who have that lived experience as well. So yeah, there's loads of people out there who are doing some really good pieces of work, and I would say keep an eye out on the Safer Walsall Partnership website. Get in touch with organisations such as yourself so that you can share information that you're aware of. Approach the local college. The college have been amazing in supporting the 16 days event, and we've got some workshops popping up during that time at the different campuses. So it's not all about what's happening in the centre of Walsall, but at the different campuses across the borough. We've got some events happening there as well, so people can go and pop in. On the 25th, we've got an event happening at the Sadler Centre. So if anything that we've said just kind of is you know, making people think a little bit differently around domestic abuse, pop in. Even if you don't talk to anybody at all, just come and see somebody on one of the stands and take one of the bags. There'll be a ton of leaflets in there, a ton of numbers that you can contact. We've got loads of resources out and about in our communities. The libraries have been absolutely fantastic. Pop into your local library. They've got some really good stuff going on, and some really good resources that you can draw down from. So there's lots of spaces out in our communities that people can try and pop into. But yeah, come and see us at the Sadler Centre. Even if you don't want to talk to any of us, just come and grab a bag, and there will be tools in there that you can use.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. So how do we then, after the event is finished, 16 days, how can we continue?
Yeah, so it's kind of what happens next, and that was really important for me with the whole planning of the 16 days. So we've had our domestic abuse forum for Walsall. We've had a task and finish group who've been working on this with me, so this isn't me alone. There's lots of partners out there who've been helping. And it was really important for us to look at what we do during that 16 days, but to also really kind of instill that message that what we do goes way beyond the 16 days of action. That's a small window of opportunity when we can raise awareness and do lots of promotion, but it's sort of what happens next. So for us, it's around, certainly at the council, it'll be around, we're due a refresh of our domestic abuse policy. We're doing some work around our strategy. We're doing some work around our needs assessment and what the picture of domestic abuse truly looks like in Walsall. We're about to onboard a new domestic abuse coordinator, so we'll have a designated person in the borough who will be taking forward that piece of work.
So can I just ask, do you draw on experts by experience?
We do, yeah. We have had situations where we draw on experts by experience, and as do lots of other organisations as well. So there was a brilliant conference held at the Village in Walsall. Roshni held a conference there, and they had some people talking about their lived experiences of things that they've gone through. There are lots of organisations who will draw on those lived experience scenarios, and I think there's nobody knows their own experience better than the person who's lived and gone through it and come out the other side. And there are some brilliant people out there doing some amazing pieces of work. So
no, that's awesome to hear, because I think sometimes we forget when we design a strategy or policy, sometimes we forget to ask the people, well, actually, how would it work? If you had to go through it, like, what would work for you?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And nobody wants a policy that just sits in a file somewhere and nobody does anything with it. So it's how is this functional? How does it meet the needs of the people who are living, working and, and studying in Walsall? And it is about how do we make just a safer, never just anything, a safer borough for everybody to be a part of.
So Gillian, if you could say or ask, who should listen to this?
Oh, anybody and everybody. I don't think people may see themselves as exempt from the conversation. This isn't something that's happening in their life, but I don't think there is anybody who we would come across that hasn't had, a friend or a family member or someone that they work with or somebody they're sat next to at college or, somebody at school on the school playground who hasn't had, some sort of experience in relation to domestic abuse. So there is nobody that I would exempt. I think everybody needs to be a part of the conversation. And yeah, I think we just have to bust those myths that it's far more common than we give it, the acknowledgement for.
Thanks so much for your time, Gillian.
So yeah, it's been great talking to you today, and there's an opportunity for people to come and visit the Safer Warsaw Partnership. Look at our website, get onto it and have a good rummage around, see what's in there. There's lots of information around domestic abuse in there. There's lots of information around other things in there. But yeah, go and have a good look there. There's lots of signposts that will take you to organisations that we've talked about. And I would encourage everybody, no matter what walk of life you come from, no matter what trade you work in or what background you come from, is just go and have a look and see what information is there that might just spark some curiosity in your mind and help you share that information with somebody else.
Awesome, and hopefully you will come to the event as well over the 16 days. Awesome, thanks so much, Gillian. Really appreciate your time. All right, thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.